Now, just a little warning before we get started here that there will be spoilers for the latest episode of Wandavision, which is the 5th episode. So if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it's a really good time to click away. Okay here, so as you may have noticed, I didn't do a review of last week's episode, so to just very quickly give some thoughts on it, it was probably the best episode so far, as it pretty much gave us the outsider's perspective of what had happened or what was going on exactly as we followed Monica Rambeau's return from the snap, which was really cool to see the panic and chaos around that happening, especially in the hospital. And we got to see up to her figuring out that everything that was happening in Westview was Wanda, or so she believes. Despite that revelation, though, at the end of last week's episode, I still think there's a chance that there's another player involved or something else going on besides that. But I think that's unlikely at this point, because as I basically said in one of my previous reviews, I think or thought that the answer to all these mysteries or the explanation as to what's going on would be a rather simple one, and that most theories people were coming up with were just way too complex or would not be understood by your average viewer who is not a Marvel superfan. And it just being Wanda is about as simple as it can get. And after this latest episode, I'm pretty much convinced that it is all just Wanda, and that we are seeing the birth of the Scarlet Witch. I mean, they made mention of the fact that unlike a lot of the other heroes, she doesn't have a special or different superhero name, she's just Wanda. And then with the anomaly being hexagon-shaped and Darcy referring to it as the Hex, which is a reference to Scarlet Witch's powers in the comics, and the fact that we are seeing her develop or discover many of those powers she does have in the comics, well, it just all makes sense that this is about the evolution of the character, among other things, of course. Which certainly doesn't mean that we don't have any questions or mysteries left yet, or that we know how this is all going to play out or eventually end. And to the credit of the show or its writers, not making the entire series just a mystery as to what's happening, and that it didn't drag us through the whole season, leaving us wondering what's going on, and that pretty much here at the midpoint, it's pulled back the proverbial curtain to show us what's actually going on. Well, I think that's working out quite well, because I'm actually far more intrigued and vested in the show now than I was at the beginning when it was essentially just a giant mystery box in the guise of an old-time television show or shows. And though that was a clever idea, no doubt about it, it was one, at least in my opinion, that would have worn out its welcome pretty quickly. I don't know how many more episodes of just being in the show and having a few strange things happening here and there I could have taken before I started to just check out a bit. And like I said, there are still plenty of mysteries and questions left, like did Wanda consciously do this or not? Because it doesn't seem like she did, it seemed like it took her a while to piece it all together, or like she made herself forget certain things and is now remembering everything. But then in this episode, when she went out of the Hex and confronted all the Sword agents, you almost got the impression that she's known all along what she's been doing. She was extremely confrontational as well and didn't seem to care what she was doing or what was happening to the people inside of the town. She also had her accent back when she left the Hex and confronted them, which was curious, almost implying some sort of split personality perhaps, or like one part of Wanda is trying to make another part of her happy again, even at the expense of all the people in this town. And then you look at the commercials and you wonder if yet another part of her is almost crying out for forgiveness or understanding, because they seem to, in a very abstract sort of way, be telling her life story or all the important events that shaped who she became. In the first episode, we had the Stark toaster that counted down or flashed like a Stark bomb, which is how her parents were killed and how she almost died as well, only the bomb didn't go off and kill her and her brother. And then there was the Baron Strucker watches, followed by the Hydra soap, which refers to her time being experimented on and how she worked for Hydra for a time. And then this week we had the Lagos paper towels, and the tagline was, "For when you make a mess you didn't mean to." And Lagos was, of course, the site of the incident that we see in Civil War, the one that she's responsible for that killed 26 people, I believe, and the one that led to the Sokovia Accords. Also in each of these commercials we see the same two people, a man and a woman, and I'm beginning to wonder if maybe those are actually her parents. Then there are still the oddities around Agnes. She seems to be different from everyone else in town. She seems to be aware as to what's going on and even thinks of herself as playing a part in a show. We know this when she asked Wanda if she wanted to take it from the top or try the scene over again in this episode, which makes me wonder if she isn't actually from the town. We didn't see her identified in last week's episode, and is instead someone else Wanda knew or knows from somewhere else. I mean, she does seem to always be there to help Wanda. Vision even points that out in the episode. So perhaps she's a family friend from the past that Wanda sort of manifested to be there for her again. She also did seem to be concerned about or protect Wanda when Geraldine or Monica Rambeau was with her. So could she maybe be the one who saved her and her brother from the rubble when they were kids? Or maybe she's the woman that took them in after their parents died, and when she was watching them, they used to always watch these old American TV shows. Or maybe she's just someone in the town who, for one reason or another, is aware of what's going on. Maybe Wanda randomly picked her to be the supporting character of the show along with a couple others. Because we also have to remember a few episodes back, Herb seemed to also know what was going on, and if I remember right, he was identified in last week's episode as someone from the town. He even almost told Vision what was going on during that previous episode. And speaking of Vision, turns out that is the real Vision, sort of at least, because it appears Wanda took his remains and sort of reanimated him, minus the Mind Stone, which was of course taken by Thanos and later destroyed. And then once she had him, she picked this random town and created a place where she and Vision could be happy together at the expense of everyone else in that town. Though Vision is getting closer and closer to just putting it all together, he just doesn't seem to remember what came before, but he certainly knows something is wrong. Another curious thing worth noting in this episode is that we saw the twins seem to be controlling their aging independent of Wanda. She even gives them a little speech after the dog dies to not just age themselves up again. And obviously, I think they are a very, very important part of what's going on here. They're going to also be a part of the MCU, and probably an important part going forward, I think. And all this then brings us to the biggest surprise of the show thus far, and what is probably the Luke in the Mandalorian level surprise Elizabeth Olsen, the actress who plays Wanda, was telling us about, or was telling us was coming, which is the return of Wanda's brother Pietro, sort of again, because this wasn't her brother from this reality, but rather it was her brother, or Quicksilver, from the X-Men universe, or from the last few X-Men movies, I should say. And so I think quite clearly, as myself and many others have speculated, we're going to see the X-Men brought into the MCU through this show, and we're starting to get our answer as to how that's going to happen. It's going to be probably something Wanda does. It's also becoming clear that they are really embracing the idea of the multiple universe, or the multiverse, just like the comic books do. Not that this hadn't already started mainly in Endgame. There's also Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness coming up, and all the rumors that the next Spider-Man movie will be delving into the Spider-Verse. And though I'm fine with the multiverse in the comics, I think I would have preferred they never really delve into that in the movies or in the MCU on the whole. I do kind of like the idea of one timeline, one set of characters, and that whatever happens in that timeline actually happens and can't be undone or changed or whatever else the case might be without something like Infinity Stones. Or if you do want to have multiple timelines, they never or very, very rarely ever cross over, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. And yeah, I do get it. It probably would have been very difficult to bring the X-Men into the MCU without having multiple timelines or something along those lines. But that could have been the one exception instead of what is quickly becoming what seems to be the rule when it comes to multiple universes and so on. But then again, who knows exactly what they're doing here. And considering I've loved pretty much everything Marvel's done with the MCU thus far, maybe I should just have faith that they have it all under control. In closing here then, I think this was yet another really enjoyable episode, and the series keeps getting better and better as it goes on. I like the blend of the real world and the Wandavision world, if you will, and I'm glad this wasn't just about the mystery itself, and that what's going on has, by and large, I think, been revealed or explained, and that the real question is what will come of all this, what happens next to Vision, to the kids, and what happens to Wanda in general. It certainly seems like they may be setting her up to become a villain, perhaps. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about the latest episode of WandaVision. Were you shocked when Quicksilver from another reality or timeline showed up? And how do you think this will all lead to the X-Men coming to the MCU, or maybe it won't at all? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Marvel. And until next time, thanks for watching.